If you're the proud new owner of a Nikon Z5II, you're going to want to know how to customize that camera to make it work better for you. This video, which is a free preview from my Nikon Z5II tutorial course, is going to take you through some of the ways to customize the controls, so all the buttons and dials, the displays, so what you see through the monitor and the viewfinder, and also how to set up your own custom user settings for common scenarios like shooting landscapes or portraits and so on. You can check out even more free previews from this course at photocourses.link/Z5II, Z52. And if you want to continue through the entire course, you can get 20% off with the code TUBE20. So here it is, customizing your controls and displays in the Nikon Z5II. In this final lesson, we're going to look at some ways we can further customize the camera, looking at some ways that we can customize our displays, how those displays appear, customizing the controls, all the buttons and dials, so that we can make them work better for us, and also creating custom user settings, the U1 through U3 positions on the mode dial. This camera has several customizable controls, and that can be expanded even further if you're using lenses with function buttons. These controls can be customized to various different functions depending on the control that you're customizing. You can see the current camera setup and then program it in the Custom Settings menu. Custom Settings F2 for shooting mode, Custom Settings F3 for playback mode, and Custom Settings G2 for movie mode. Anytime you want a reminder of what your controls do, this is where you can come. Or if you want to change how something is set up, you'll also come into these menus. You can just tap on or highlight and press OK to see what these functions are. Different functions are available for each control, and this is going to vary between shooting, playback, and movie modes. For example, you will see different functions available for the Lens FN button and the video recording button. So it's going to require that you kind of go through each control to see what's available for that control. And there are some things to note when programming your controls. Some functions act as a press and release button for that function, while others act as a press and hold, and then use the command dial to change that function, like white balance. You're going to press and hold that button, and then use the command dial to change your white balance. And these functions are grouped in the list, so you kind of know which ones are press and release, and which ones are press and use the command dial. Some functions are also press to turn on and press again to turn off. These are indicated by hold next to the function name. Hold does not mean that you need to press and hold these controls. What it means is that when you press and release it, it's going to hold that function until you press and release it again. They will, however, be reset when you cycle the camera power. Some controls can also be disabled by selecting none for the function. Like the menus, spend some time using your camera and determine which settings you want to be able to change just by pushing a button, and what you want the buttons to do in each mode: still photography, playback, or video. Feel free to reprogram these as time goes on. It's gonna change, and that's the great thing about having this kind of customization. Just have a purpose for each camera control. If you ever need to restore controls to the factory defaults, highlight that control, press the delete button, and select yes. To restore all controls to the factory defaults, press and hold the delete button. You can also use the monitor touchscreen as an additional control when looking through the viewfinder. We looked at that in the focusing lesson, but remember that's going to be in the Custom Settings F4 Touch FN menu. Assign Touch FN is where you'll choose what that touchscreen is going to do when you're looking through the viewfinder. And then Touch FN Area is going to set which area of the monitor is active for touch in both horizontal and vertical orientations. Looking at some of the other custom settings, F6 reverse dial rotation, If you have this on, that will reverse the command dial directions when using the command dials for exposure compensation and or shutter speed and aperture. F7, release button to use dial. Going back to our example of using the FN button for white balance, where you have to press and hold the FN button and then use the command dial to change your white balance. If you set this to on, you don't need to hold that button. You just press the front FN button, release it, and then you can use the command dials to change the white balance. And then you press that button again to go back into regular shooting mode. Because holding a button down while rotating the command dials, that can be a difficult maneuver to pull off. So if you have difficulty holding a button while rotating the command dials, turn this on. F11 control ring response, that's for lenses that have a control ring, it's set to high by default, which I find makes the control ring a little too touchy, way too responsive for me to adjust the function that I have assigned to it, which is aperture. It changes my aperture way too fast when I rotate that control ring, so I set this to low. F12, switch focus control ring roles. That's going to swap what is set for focus ring and control ring. The lens zoom ring is always going to be used to zoom the lens. In F13, power zoom button options, if you want to be able to use the camera zoom in and zoom out button to zoom that power zoom lens, you can turn that on here. And then you can also set the speed at which that lens will zoom in power zoom speed. And then finally, prefer sub-selector center. You might want to turn this off if you want to be able to move the focus area while pushing on that sub-selector. For example, if AE lock, auto exposure lock, is programmed for the sub-selector push function as it is by default, you can push in on the center of the sub-selector to lock your exposure, and while you're pushing it, tilt it around the screen to move your focus area. You may want to have that functionality. If this is turned on, you cannot move the focus area if you are pushing the center of that sub-selector. And you may want to do that if you are afraid of accidentally moving the focus area around the screen while you're pushing the center of the sub-selector to do whatever function is programmed to it. The next kind of custom controls that we're going to learn about here are the custom user settings. Those are the U1 through U3 positions on the mode dial, and those let you save 3 custom camera configurations and recall those at any time using those mode dial positions. For example, you may have a specific set of exposure and picture control and focus settings for landscapes. You save that to U1. Then you might have another group of settings that you use for portraits that you save to U2. And then if you do any kind of video, you might have specific video settings that you save to the U3 position. So to set these up, the first thing you want to do is rotate the mode dial to the exposure mode to be used. For example, if you're doing portraits, you may want to set A for aperture priority. Then you are going to set your exposure settings as appropriate for that mode. Those are your aperture, shutter speed, ISO, and exposure compensation. So again, for the previous example, if you're doing portraits, you may want to set your aperture to f4, your ISO to auto, and your exposure compensation to 0. That's a good starting place for portraits. Then you're going to go through your photo shooting menu, set all of those up as appropriate. Same thing for your video recording menu if you're going to use that for recording video. And then you can go through your custom settings menu, the pencil icon, and then set up any of those settings that you might want to be different for the type of program that you're saving to that camera. For example, landscapes, portraits, what's unique to each one of those things that you want to have different when you select one of these modes. Then you're going to go to your setup menu, save user settings, Select a position for these settings, U1 through U3, press OK, and then press OK again to save those settings. It's really easy to use these settings. You can just recall them at any time by rotating that dial to the appropriate setting, and then flip that photo video selector to either photo or video, depending on what you want to use. You'll then see the user setting designation next to the exposure mode that's saved to that setting in the upper left. And you can make modifications to any of these settings while using these modes. For example, you're using that portrait setting, which saved an aperture of f4, and you want to use f11. That new aperture is only going to be in use until you either resave that setting with that new aperture or you turn the camera power off. Any modifications you make to a user's setting are going to be reset when the camera power is cycled. However, you can go back to save user settings and resave those new settings at any time. You can also reset these user settings if you just want to start over, start from scratch, by selecting Reset User Settings in the Setup menu. Those were our controls. Now let's look at some ways to customize our displays. D10 View Mode, Photo Live View. We referenced that earlier. This allows you to set whether or not you want your exposure and image settings previewed in the live view. Show effects of settings. This is going to let you see how your picture control, white balance, and exposure settings are going to affect your final processed photo. What you see in the live view here is not what your RAW photo will look like if you're recording RAW. If you're working with studio strobes, you can press the multi-selector right and choose Only when flash is not used to be able to see your composition better in dark studio environments. Adjust for ease of viewing will give you more of a DSLR style preview in the displays, where you're just looking at the scene without any picture styling settings applied, which you may want to do if you are only recording the RAW file format. Pressing the multi-selector right will let you select Auto or Custom. Custom lets you choose which settings are previewed and how. Starlight View for Photo Live View. This is going to brighten the scene in front of you, which we saw earlier can help you focus in dark scenes, but it's also used to help you compose in dark scenes, like if you do astrophotography. Depending on how dark the scene is, it may take a few seconds for the live view to settle to something that's usable, so just don't move the camera around too fast. This requires that you move the camera you compose quite slowly. Warm display colors. You can use this option to reduce the strain on your eyes and/or preserve your night vision in dark environments. All of the symbology, the menus, and all of the overlays on the screens are going to turn an orange-red color, and there are two mode options in this menu. Mode 1 enables this red symbology for shooting mode, the menus, and playback mode. The live view, the scene that you see through the screen, is also going to be in warm tones. And this is my preference to get the full benefits of this mode. You're just seeing a monochrome image through the viewfinder. It's just going to be in warm tones rather than black and white. Mode 2 is like Mode 1, except that the live view preview, the scene in front of you, is not going to be altered. That is still going to be in normal color, but all of the other symbols on the screen are going to be that red color. You can also change the brightness of the warm display setting in this menu for when you enable it. D15 image frame, if enabled, will give you a very thin white border around your image in both the monitor and the viewfinder. You can disable it if you want to, but I find this helps frame the image, as the name implies. In D16 grid type, you can choose the type of grid overlay that you'll have on your screen if that is enabled in the D19 and D20 shooting display customization menus, and we'll look at that in just a minute. There are 5 options here. You can see examples of what they all are as you select them, The 3x3 rule of thirds is probably the most popular and my preference. D17 Virtual Horizon Type. Like grid type is where you'll choose the type of virtual horizon if it's enabled for your displays. Type A will show the levels in the center of the screen, and Type B will move them off to the side and the bottom. You can customize your displays for photo mode in D19 and D20, and for video mode in G17 and G18. Whatever you have set here, this is what's going to happen when you press the display button when either looking at the monitor or looking through the viewfinder. When you press the display button, your screens, your displays are going to cycle through different overlays, and this is where you'll customize those overlays. You can have up to 5 different overlays for the monitor and 4 for the viewfinder. Disable the display options that you don't want by highlighting them and pressing OK, and you can customize the displays that you do want by highlighting those and pressing the multi-selector right. You'll see a preview of what that display is going to look like as you check or uncheck the available options. Simple is just going to show you your basic shooting mode, exposure information, battery, and shots remaining, while Detail is going to show you additional information all over the screen, like your focus, shooting, and image settings. Enabling touch controls will display the touchscreen options available to you while you're shooting by having a box around those touchscreen options. Virtual Horizon will enable the Virtual Horizon type chosen in D17. Histogram is going to show you a small histogram in the lower right. This is called brightness information in the video custom settings. Framing grid enables the grid overlay set in D16. Center indicator displays some crosshairs in the center of the screen if you need to reference the exact center. Center weighted area will overlay the size of the center weighted metering area set in the B5 custom settings. This option is not available for the video modes. And finally, F8 reverse indicators. That's going to flip how the exposure metering scale looks in your displays.